On April 16, 1999, the Raleigh Ripper was finally brought to justice after a reign of terror across the state of North Carolina that left 14 women dead. The killer's true identity had been Kevin Gruber, a local gas station attendant originally from West Virginia, who was arrested at work in the early hours of the morning. His face was plastered all over the media when he was cuffed and dragged in to be questioned and processed. Like many serial killers, the most frightening thing about Kevin was the fact that he just seemed so normal. The idea that a person like this could have committed the atrocities of the Raleigh Ripper raised a frightening question we all need to contend with. What turns a person into a monster? This question was particularly prescient for Dr. James Whittington, a criminal psychologist tasked with conducting the first official psychological evaluation on Gruber. Ever since the true identity of the killer had come to light, the case had held a particular fascination for him, mainly because Gruber the man and Gruber the killer seemed to almost be two entirely separate people. According to all evidence, the Raleigh Ripper was an insidious, methodical criminal genius. He'd stalked some of his victims, all women who lived alone, for weeks before striking, conducting detailed surveillance of their homes that allowed him to isolate them, bypass their security systems, and remove any means of getting help. He blocked doors, cut phone lines, and always selected vulnerable targets. Despite being a seasoned criminal psychologist, the actual details of Gruber's crimes had kept Whittington awake at night. He had a wife and a young son at home, and the thought of a man like Gruber prowling out there made him fear for both of them. This was no thrill killer. He was a sadistic torturer who seemed to delight in the pain and terror of his prey. He'd chosen victims he could take his time with, infiltrated their homes like a gust of cold air through an open window, and slipped out through darkness like a shadow. Perfectly controlled crime scenes, no stray evidence, nothing but death left behind. For months, he'd run circles around the police. Thousands of people who fit the Raleigh Ripper profile were interviewed. Sting operations were conducted. Communities formed neighborhood watches to keep each other safe from the killer's next move. And none of it did any good. From seasoned detectives to legions of beat cops, nobody could get the jump on Kevin Gruber. The fact he was even caught came out of pure chance. A local hiker, Mike Fletcher, just so happened to hear the screaming coming from a nearby home in the woods and made the heroic decision to run in and intervene. When he walked in on Gruber committing the attack, the killer panicked and fled through an open window. In his haste, he left a partial print on the window frame. That, combined with Mike's description of the assailant, was enough to finally link Kevin to the 14 murders of the Raleigh Ripper. The problem, from Dr. Whittington's perspective, was that by all accounts, Kevin Gruber seemed to be an idiot. This was no suave, charismatic Ted Bundy type. In all the prior photos and interviews, Kevin had that deer-in-the-headlights look of a man who's just in way over his head. Dr. Whittington had also pored over Kevin's school records. The only thing he seemed to excel at was being mediocre. He even got held back a year in 5th grade. Since graduating high school, he'd been kicked out by his parents for freeloading and hadn't been able to consistently hold down a job for more than 8 months. His only prior criminal convictions had been one drunk and disorderly conduct charge and possession of an ounce of pot back in 1991, for which he got a suspended sentence due to being a minor at the time. It just didn't make sense to Dr. Whittington that this man and the diabolically brilliant Raleigh Ripper were the same person, despite all the incontrovertible evidence proving it so. Despite his reservations, he needed to meet this man and find out why and how he committed all these horrific murders, despite being such an unremarkable individual. Sitting across from Gruber in the secure interview chamber, Whittington was once again struck with how incredibly disappointing he was. Thin and wiry, with glazed-over eyes, messy hair, and a pathetic tuft of weak stubble on his chin, he looked more like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo than a cold-blooded killer. His answers to most of Dr. Whittington's questions were also insubstantial, with him often losing his train of thought, or even needing to ask the psychologist to carefully explain the question to him. Most of the time, Gruber tried to make irritating slow-motion small talk, concerning everything from the weather to movies he enjoyed. The interview had been utterly worthless. Until 4 hours in, Gruber mentioned something that awakened a strange memory in Dr. Whittington. He said, "Hey, say Doc, you remember that TV show Bobble the Clown? I loved that show as a kid. It was like my religion. Your kid ever watch it?" There were a number of unsettling things about this. From the fact that for some reason Dr. Whittington could remember something about Bobble the Clown, to the fact that Kevin Gruber had no way of knowing that Dr. Whittington even had a kid. But still, he didn't let his concern show, and instead asked Gruber what he remembered about Bobble the Clown. Gruber smiled and replied, "Old Bobble taught me everything I know, Doc." To which Dr. Whittington asked the million-dollar question, "Like what, Kevin?" Gruber shrugged and just said, "All kinds of stuff, Doc. Like how to watch without being seen, how to Jimmy open a window without making a sound, how to make him hurt real bad without him dying, so you can even make it last longer, so it can be more fun. And of course, he taught me to get out without leaving anything behind. Well, Bobble made this all possible, Doc, and he told me all about you too, that all this was gonna happen someday. All good things have to come to an end eventually, right? Tell the wife and kid he says hi, by the way." Dr. Whittington was astounded. Gruber seemed to stare vacantly off into space for a moment, before suddenly claiming that he had a terrible headache, and he needed to go back to his cell. In any other situation, Whittington might have just written off Bobble the Clown as one of two things: a psychotic delusion or a sophisticated psychopath faking a psychotic delusion in hopes of getting the insanity plea. Like the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, pretending a demonic talking dog possessed by Satan made him commit all of his murders. But Whittington had heard of this Bobble the Clown before, and it wasn't in a scenario that a gas station clerk like Kevin Gruber ever would have heard of. It took half a day of research into his own archive notes to remember exactly where he'd heard it before. A child he'd interviewed almost a decade ago, who shoved gasoline and fireworks through the letterbox of an old woman's home, leading to a fire that left the woman and her dog dead. When Dr. Whittington interviewed the crying child about his motives, he'd said that it wasn't his fault. Bobble the Clown had told him to do it on the TV. Given that there were no records of a Bobble the Clown show ever airing on any local networks, Whittington had written it off at the time as the overactive imagination of a very frightened, very disturbed young child. That same child would later go into psychiatric care before reoffending as a serial arsonist upon release. The last building he ever burned down had only one occupant: himself. Fire investigators would later state that he had just sat there, legs crossed, placidly waiting for the flames to lick his bones clean. It was becoming incredibly clear that this Bobble the Clown fantasy, if it were even a fantasy at all, seemed to be much more than an isolated phenomenon. He used his credentials to start exploring other strange crimes of passion committed by children and young adults, even asking some of his friends in the criminal psychology community, off the record, if they'd ever heard of such a concept before. Frighteningly, it didn't take Dr. Whittington very long at all to hit pay dirt. There was the case of the Orfeo family murders in 1985 out in Arkansas. 9-year-old Donnie Orfeo had taken his dad's rifle out of the cabinet in the dead of night and walked room to room shooting his mother, father, and 2 older sisters in their beds. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called the police. By the time they arrived at the scene, the only survivor was Donnie Orfeo himself, drenched in blood sitting in front of the TV. His hollow eyes stared zombie-like into the static. He did not resist arrest. When Donnie was taken in for questioning, his emotional responses were cold and flat. When he was asked why he murdered his family, he said that it was because his father told him he was watching too much TV. His favorite TV character, Bobble the Clown, had told him that if he murdered his family with Daddy's gun, he could watch as much TV as he liked. Just reading this, Dr. Whittington could feel sweat beading on his brow. 2 cases were a coincidence, but 3 were a pattern. And oh, how he wished it had stopped at just 3. From 4 days of searching, he discovered no fewer than 17 different seemingly isolated crimes with mentions of Bobble the Clown attached to the file. A 5-year-old boy from New Jersey who drowned his neighbor's cat in a river with a gym bag full of heavy stones told police that he'd learned the technique from Bobble the Clown. An 8-year-old girl, arrested for tying up and torturing her sister with a rusty coat hanger in Texas, had, of course, gotten the idea from watching an episode of Bobble the Clown. Murder, assault, vandalism, torture, an extensive countrywide rap sheet all led back to that one recurring factor. They all learned it from watching Bobble the Clown. Dr. Whittington had gotten in contact with a few friends who knew people in broadcasting. While carefully omitting some of the grislier details, he implored them for any new information on whether a TV show with Bobble the Clown had ever gone out anywhere. But despite their best efforts, they didn't find any records of Bobble the Clown or any similar educational clown shows airing. Was it possibly some complex shared hallucination? Dr. Whittington simultaneously felt burdened by all this terrifying knowledge, and utterly powerless to do anything useful with it. If he started blowing the whistle to the media or his superiors that a spat of horrible crimes were all being caused by a violent imaginary clown, he'd just look as deranged as any of the people he'd been studying. There seemed to be nothing he could do to stop or help any of this. He returned home that night with a heavy heart, hanging up his coat. He needed someone to talk to about all this, but he couldn't burden his wife with the horrors he encountered daily on the job, much less a living nightmare like this mysterious Bobble the Clown. As he walked towards the kitchen to pour himself a stiff drink, he heard strange, jaunty music coming from the living room. He stepped back and saw his 7-year-old son Ben watching something on TV. As he stepped closer, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Ben, entranced, eyes fixed on a dancing, grinning, animated clown on the screen. Ben slowly turned his head towards Dr. Whittington, eyes wide and bulging, and said, "I've been waiting for you to get home, Daddy." Bobble said he got tired of playing with Kevin. He wants to play with us now. Dr. Whittington turned and looked at the clown on the screen again. He could swear it was smiling right at him. That was the last thing he remembered before the sudden, intense headache and the ground standing up to embrace him. When he woke up, he was in bed with his wife, and neither of them could move, thanks to the heavy ropes binding their body to the frame. Bobble is very good at teaching children to tie knots. They tried to scream, but a shiny flash of duct tape held both of their mouths closed. Dr. Whittington's eyes swiveled in his head to Ben, standing at his bedside. The boy was holding a kitchen knife, and he was very eager to show his mom and dad the fun new trick Bobble the Clown had taught him. To the SCP Foundation, this terrifying anomalous TV show is known as SCP-993, known to cause blackouts in adults and violent antisocial behavior in children. They do their best to keep the broadcasts contained, but if ever a child in your life seems to be acting strangely, perhaps ask yourself very carefully what they're watching when you're not around. Now go check out The Secret at the Bottom of SCP-087 Explained and Procedure 110 Montauk Revealed Fear Alone SCP-231 Tale for more harrowing tales of anomalous terror.